Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. This week, people continue to resist the Mountain Valley Pipeline. Some folks have complained to the company about noise from compressor stations.
You know, and I said, buddy, if you had to sleep at it every night, you'd be different, but you don't care.
Why is Appalachia so prone to severe flooding? We spoke with a reporter whose team dug into the data to find out.
Really what we're trying to do with this story is look at what makes it such a particularly vulnerable place right now, as those rains of the past are not necessarily what the rains of the future look like.
And a good blanket will keep you warm on a cold night. But a handmade temperature blanket can convey a message to a loved one.
It's not just a blanket to put over you, but it has a little bit of meaning behind it. And I hope that you realize I was thinking of you with every row I put in the blanket.
You'll hear these stories and more this week inside Appalachia.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by the COPD Foundation, offering educational materials and information on COPD symptoms, treatments, and diagnoses. Learn more at copdfoundation.org.
Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. The Mountain Valley Pipeline stretches 303 miles from northern West Virginia to southern Virginia. Now the company behind the pipeline wants to build a new compressor station in Montgomery County, Virginia. For a glimpse of what may be headed their way, Radio IQ's Roxy Todd went to Greenbrier County, West Virginia. She spoke with a family who lives near one of MVP's existing compressor stations.
There's fresh snow and bitter cold on the Eisenman's farm. It got down to 1 degree in the night. The Mountain Valley Pipeline runs right through fields of cattle. Above us, just out of view of the top of the ridge, less than a mile away, is the Stallworth Compressor Station.
It hasn't given me anything but noise and aggravation.
Gary Eisenman is a Baptist preacher. He and his son have raised cattle here for decades. Since the pipeline was built, there's been construction, muddy runoff, and quite often, noise.
These cattle, they don't like that noise. Animals don't like that noise. They don't like that mess. You're disturbing God's creation.
Today, the air is pretty quiet. It's like a faint hum in the background. His son, Stacy, says there have been other days when it was loud enough to keep them up at night.
If you're out hunting, you can't hear the deer coming. You have to see them. It's loud enough that you can't hear them walking in the woods. You see them before you hear them.
The Eisenmans breed bulls for rodeos. Famous bulls from across the country have gone into their stock, with names like Jack the Ripper, Blueberry Wine, Houdini. Stacy thinks the sounds from the compressor station have made the bulls more agitated.
If you've ever been to a bull ride or seen one, music's cranked up. It's just part of the adrenaline. And they're used to that for a short period of time. Here lately, it's been like they've never left a bull ride. They've never left a rodeo. They're a little edgy.
He's worried about what impacts all this may have for the health of their animals and themselves. He's concerned about water pollution and air quality from the compressor station, too. Gary Eisenman says he feels like this pipeline has been a never-ending fight between a wealthy company and rural people without much power to resist them. He shared this take with an MVP representative who was at a recent community meeting.
You know, and I said, buddy, if you had to sleep at it every night, you'd be different, but you don't care. Just as long as you get your dollar, that's all you're after. The love of money is the root of all evil, and God's word says that, and you love plenty of it.
MVP wants to enlarge the compressor station near the Eisenman's farm and 2 other stations in West Virginia as part of a project called MVP Boost. They want to build a new one 100 miles away in Elliston, Virginia.
I think this will be a very safe facility.
Steve Fijalkowski is with the Montgomery County Board of Supervisors. He visited the Stallworth station in West Virginia and said he was impressed with the safety features. He's heard from constituents who are worried about the risks if the pipeline fails.
I hear that a lot. Matter of fact, some of my fellow supervisors say it's not if the pipeline blows up, it's when. There's a lot of things that can happen. Is it likely to happen? And that's where I don't think it is likely. I don't believe it is. You can say, all right, well, I don't trust the people that put it in the ground. Well, I can't help you there.
Vigilkowski says county officials don't have any power over whether the compressor station is built. That's up to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. But at a county meeting in December, 5 others on the board voted in favor of sending a letter to FERC asking for more clarity on safety concerns they have with the compressor station. Other local leaders have given the project an enthusiastic vote of confidence, including the Roanoke Regional Chamber of Commerce. 4 researchers at Virginia Tech recently submitted a comment to FERC detailing an environmental justice study they conducted with residents near the proposed Swan compressor station in Elliston. The study found 41% of residents are vulnerable to environmental harm due to age, with 118 children and 74 senior citizens in the sample. Researchers found 43% of households had at least one person with a chronic illness or disability, many with a lung or heart condition, making them more susceptible to harm from pollution. Crystal Mello lives in Montgomery County and has been organizing with the group Protect Our Water Heritage Rights, going door to door talking with neighbors about how they feel about the proposed compressor station. At a public meeting organized by MVP on December 9th, Mello said many people she's spoken to are unaware about the pipeline or the project.
And I feel like there are people that aren't at this meeting tonight because whether they work 2 jobs because the electric bill's high, or they don't have anybody to care for their kids to come to a meeting like this, I feel like they're being taken advantage of.
Back in West Virginia, Gary Eiseman offered this advice to anyone in the path of a compressor station.
Take a lot of pictures before they ever start so they can see what it's like and see what they tear up. Anything that they tell you, you get it in writing.
Next year, Eiseman and his wife will turn 86. His opinion of MVP has only worsened in the decade he's had dealings with them.
They lie to you. They make promises they can't keep.
If the MVP Boost project is approved, the company could begin construction on the expanded compressor station near the Eiseman's home in December 2026. For Inside Appalachia, I'm Roxy Todd in Meadowbridge, West Virginia.
Over the past few years, catastrophic floods have washed out parts of Appalachia and devastated communities. Eastern Kentucky in 2022, Western North Carolina, Virginia, and East Tennessee in 2024, and then Southern West Virginia early last year. So why is such intense flooding hitting the mountains? And what do frequent major storms mean for the future? A team of Washington Post journalists took on this question in a story published late last year. Journalist Brady Dennis joins us. Brady Dennis, thank you so much for coming on Inside Appalachia to speak with us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You're the lead author on a Washington Post story headlined, "Why Appalachia is One of the World's Worst Hotspots for Dangerous Floods." So why is Appalachia one of the world's worst spots for dangerous flooding?
I guess first off, I'd like to acknowledge, what I'm sure that many of your listeners already know and would say that that's not surprising. Obviously, Appalachia has always had big storms, heavy rains. Appalachia has always had floods. But really what we're trying to do with this story is look at what makes it such a particularly vulnerable place right now, as those rains of the past are not necessarily what the rains of the future look like, or even really rainstorms of the present. And some colleagues and I from the Post started by looking at the data that really make clear that there are these many stretches, sky over Appalachia, parts of Appalachia is just carrying more moisture than it used to in the past. I think of it as like the sky is just more waterlogged. It's like a sponge holding more water than it did in the past. While that always doesn't result in rain, when it does rain, there's the potential there for these really kind of torrential downpours that I think most of us are familiar with now. And so that's really what this story is about, is the reasons why that is happening and the reasons that Appalachia, at least parts of Appalachia, are really kind of in the bullseye for that phenomenon.
Yeah, your team studied this metric known as integrated vapor transport, or IVT, which basically measures the intensity of moisture in the sky and where it's flowing. So what did y'all find?
It's really interesting. I mean, there are people on the team that I worked with who are a lot smarter about this science than I am. But I think in a nutshell, it comes down to this, that as the air above us gets warmer and wetter over time, there's just more potential there for these extreme rainfalls and obviously the flooding that occurs. And the reason, in part, that much of Appalachia lies in this stretch that's really vulnerable to that is that there's this, for lack of a better term, a conveyor belt of this moisture coming up often from the Gulf of Mexico to the mountains of Appalachia, intersecting with the mountains there and causing these huge storms. So part of it is the climate that's changing. The atmosphere is warmer. Part of it is just a fact of geography, where Appalachia lies and sort of the landscape of these mountains. And then, of course, which we can talk about more, you have what happens when the water comes down, the landscape and where things are and how the water flows really plays a big role in that story, that piece of the story.
Yeah, so let's get into what happens when the water comes down, because not only are the mountains more susceptible to flooding, but they're more vulnerable too. The story talks about how some of the integrated vapor transport, you see similar dynamics elsewhere in the country, but they're kind of different. What makes Appalachia so vulnerable?
I mean, Appalachia is more vulnerable for any number of reasons. One we talked about is just the landscape. Obviously, it stands to reason that large amounts of rain and water falling on mountains, steep slopes, is going to put places at risk of flash flooding. We definitely see that throughout Appalachia for as long as any of us could remember. Obviously, that gets worse as more rain falls from the sky. But then when you're talking about parts of Appalachia specifically, you have an element of infrastructure and where things are. Historically, we've built in Appalachia on waterways, along rivers, because that's where the only flat land is, and that's where people live and businesses are located, and roads and railroad tracks and all these things that are essential to life in the mountains. But that also puts it really at risk of these severe flood events. Unlike some other parts of the country that have also seen an increase in these heavy rains, I'm thinking parts of the West, Appalachia has this widespread poverty that makes it more difficult to recover once you have an event like this. Or you have people up front that traditionally don't have flood insurance, and that is not helping get people back on their feet in any large numbers. And then you just have a limited capacity by state and local governments to either work on these issues up front and prevent them, or come in and help after a disaster happens. When all those factors come together, it just makes it a place where this is really already historically a problem, but I would argue, and the data would tell us, is becoming more of a threat as time goes on.
Let's hear an excerpt from that story.
I would be glad to read it. McDowell County, West Virginia. Carol Lester remembers every flood, the epic one in 1977 when she fled over a mountain with her young children to avoid rising water, the deluges of 2001 and 2002, which left a trail of destruction in this area, but somehow spared the modest house she and her husband have shared for more than a half century. But like many others who have spent their lives in the coal fields of southern West Virginia, she had never seen the likes of what arrived on a frigid day this past February. Days of rain sent the Tug Fork River surging from a relatively calm 6.8 feet to a raging 22.7 feet in just 10 hours, filling the river and its tributaries far beyond their banks. Quote, "It was like you could hear the devil and his demons in that water," recalled Lester, 73, who endured a harrowing escape thanks to friends who came to the couple's rescue. "I've never been so scared in my life." Across McDowell County, the rising water wrecked roads and bridges and left residents stranded. It swallowed cars and trucks, sent debris downstream, flooded homes, and claimed 3 lives, including that of a 2-year-old boy. In the town of Welch, the flood swamped City Hall, the library, and the sheriff's station. It also blocked the main road to the hospital. This time, the devastation carried the fingerprints of a mostly invisible but profound atmospheric shift. As the air gets warmer and wetter over time, states within central Appalachia lie within a region particularly vulnerable to the extreme rainfall and the flooding that so often follows.
So the story details why Appalachia is prone to flooding and why it's more deeply affected than some other places. But it also gets into the experiences of people on the ground. So what can you tell us about some of the folks you spoke to and what they had to say?
Yeah, so I went all over for this story, McDowell County in southern West Virginia. There's any number of places when you start talking about West Virginia and flooding, certainly Kentucky and flooding, any number of other places in this region. You could go a lot of places and talk to people about flooding. What drew me to McDowell County was the floods that had hit earlier this year that really devastated this part of West Virginia, and became pretty clear right away that that the recovery was really slow. This is not something that, for the most part, made the national news, but it really turned people's lives upside down. And I just wanted to go explore that. I spent time in this county talking to people who had been affected in one way or another by these floods. And from Carol Luster, who's mentioned in the lead of the story, a sweet lady who has lived in her home there for more than half a century, and told me this really amazing story of carrying her young children up over the mountain to get them away from the water back in 1977, which was the biggest flood to this point until this year. But, like so many people, she told me that this eclipsed that. This was worse than anything that she could remember. And I kept hearing that all over the place. I talked with Pastor Brad Davis, who actually grew up in Mingo County, but is a pastor. He ministers at 5 small Methodist churches in McDowell. He is still not back in his house, which we walked through together in Welch, that was flooded in February. He's really been outspoken about the need for the state to do more when it comes to flooding. He's really been a sort of an activist on that front. I spent time with the mayor of Welch, Harold McBride, who has done what he can to try to help his town recover. And I mean that in a way of from a policy perspective, but also out there, helping paint the town ice cream shop and actually doing the work of recovery. He's really a proponent of trying to take some proactive steps to be better prepared the next time the flooding hits, which everyone expects that there will always be a next time. Of course, the problem there is, the money to make that happen. Just so many people told us, similar stories. There was a woman, Linda Pearson, who lives near Berwind. Even now, after the floods, she keeps bags packed by the bed for her and her husband in case they have to race out. She has medicines in there and important papers. And that just really struck me because it tells you how on edge people are. This sort of looms over everyday life, to keep a suitcase by your bed ready to leave at any moment.
Brady Dennis, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure.
That was Washington Post journalist Brady Dennis. You can find a transcript of our conversation and a link to his team's story. They're on our website, wvpublic.org. Coming up, we remember a self-taught fiddle-making master craftsman. You're inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by the Charleston, West Virginia Convention and Visitors Bureau, Charleston WV, where scenic trails and on-the-water adventure meet cultural experiences in the capital city of West Virginia. Your adventure begins here at charlestonwv.com.
For more than 70 years, Tennessee fiddlemaker Gene Horner built instruments that have traveled across the country. His fiddles have been to Carnegie Hall, the Grand Ole Opry, and the Smithsonian. Horner's craft was shaped by his roots in Appalachia's Cumberland Plateau and his fascination with great Italian violin makers of the 17th and 18th centuries. Horner died last January at age 91. Reporter Lisa Kaufman interviewed Horner at his workshop in 2023 and had this remembrance.
In 1951, Gene Horner arrived in Washington, D.C. He was 18, on leave from the Navy, and headed to his first museum ever. He'd come for fiddles.
The train station, you could see the Smithsonian, and I went over to look at fiddles, and boy, they got them there,
Gene's obsession with fiddles had started a few years earlier at age 14. He'd found a broken fiddle in his grandfather's cabin in Westall, the cabin where Gene and his father before him were born. By the time Gene got that fiddle glued back together, he was hooked. 4 years later, he hoped the Smithsonian could help him figure out how fiddles were made. But that wasn't the case.
You see, I didn't know enough. I was looking at a forest, but I couldn't see the trees.
Months later, Gene was reading in his bunk on the Navy ship, and an advertisement in Popular Mechanics caught his eye: how to build a Stradivarius. He could order a manual for making a violin designed more than 200 years before by Antonio Stradivari, one of the world's greatest luthiers. Now is probably time to explain the difference between a fiddle and a violin. There isn't one. Not really. The difference lies in the way you string them, the kind of music you play on them. Or as Gene would later say, if I'm selling one to you, it's a violin. Violins cost more. In 1951, that Stradivarius manual offered details of fiddle making he'd hungered to understand.
I've always been a great believer in books. And when I seen that little book advertised, I just ordered it. They sent it to the ship, and I'd study that thing.
After the Navy, Gene came home to Westall, determined to make fiddles like that. Problem was, there was no one to teach him. So Gene kept reading. He read every book he could get his hands on about great European luthiers from centuries before. The Italian masters inspired Gene the most, especially Stradivari and his contemporary Giuseppe Guarneri. Gene pored over the details of their violins. Longtime friend and Grammy-winning fiddle player Kenny Sears says Gene had to rely on illustrations to learn his craft.
Gene was very self-educated. He didn't have a lot of formal education, but he read all the time. And he looked at pictures and he studied them.
And Gene began designing fiddles based on those pictures. He made his first fiddle the year he got out of the Navy. He said it left a lot to be desired.
I made one that year. It'd give you nightmares to look at it. But I was learning.
He just learned it the hard way, and he told me that he burned up a lot of fiddles in his wood stove in the shop. It just wouldn't, if they didn't suit him, he'd just make kindling out of them.
Making a living was tough in Westall, and Gene and his wife Ann had 3 children to raise. To pay the bills, Ann worked at a sewing factory in another town, while Gene put in 12-hour days making cabinets and studying fiddles on the side. Gene's son Bruce recalls what a long shot it was for his father to earn a living making fiddles.
Somebody making a fiddle in Westall? That's about as far out thing as you could think of to do around here.
But Gene kept at it. It was painstaking work, especially without a mentor or money to back him. He had to improvise. Gene built his own workshop out of wood from an abandoned hotel that he bought and demolished. He made his own luthier tools, gouges and finger planes and chisels. Bruce says his dad was self-reliant to the core.
I mean, that's what kind of man he was. He didn't, I don't know, it's just like, you don't need money, you just need to be able to make something yourself.
In between building cabinets, Gene taught himself the ins and outs of fiddle making. He learned to carve scrolls, tuning pegs, all the delicate arching of a fiddle body. The work was not just demanding, it was unforgiving, as Kenny Sears points out.
There must be 1,000 things that has to be done to make one of these, from splitting the log to varnishing and rubbing it out. And if you just get one of them wrong, it ruins the whole thing.
In time, that hard work paid off. Gene's fiddles stopped going in the wood stove.
It took several of them, about 10, I guess. And lo and behold, I made one once. I've got it.
Gene was particular about the wood he used. The high-end violin world believed that you couldn't make a good violin from American wood. Gene disagreed. He knew the Cumberland Plateau forests and the loggers who worked there. And when their saws buzzed into a piece of curly maple fine enough for a Gene Horner fiddle, they called him. Longtime friend Mike Whitehead remembers Gene's close connection with local loggers.
He had special friends that would stop the sawmill operation long enough to roll that log off and move on to another one and call Gene, and he would come and sometimes buy the whole log.
Sometimes loggers would bring Gene into the forest to see a special tree they'd found.
So he knew the wood from the time it was a living tree until it was a finished instrument.
Gene made other instruments, mandolins and banjos, even a cello. But in his mind, fiddle was king. Word got out about how good his fiddles were. Professional musicians started finding their way to Westall. Kenny Sears remembers his first sight of the shop. He came with a former bandmate, and they were awed by all the fiddles.
We started tuning them up, and we'd play, I like this one over here, and I like this one over here, And we decided we'd never seen that many good fiddles in one place in our whole life.
One striking quality of Gene's fiddles was their balance. Clear and bright on the high notes, warm and rich on the low. It's a quality Kenny appreciates. Kenny's classically trained. He played with the Dallas Symphony Orchestra before his bluegrass career.
You don't get that low end out of a lot of fiddles, Usually when you get the low end is good, the high end is not. To get a balanced fiddle, Gene knew how to do that, and he did it very well.
By the 1970s, Gene was finally making instruments full-time. He wasn't getting rich. I make about a cornbread living off this, Gene liked to say. But in the years that followed, he gained recognition. Professionals toured with his instruments. Gene became a staple artist at Dollywood's annual Harvest Fair. And 3 decades after he saw that fine violin collection in the Smithsonian, Gene made it back to the museum himself, demonstrating his craft during their Folklife Festival. In 2009, he earned the Governor's Arts Award in Tennessee. Gene didn't slow down. He kept turning out fiddles, somewhere between 200 and 500 in his career. He never really kept count. Then in 2022, a major blow came. Gene lost his wife, Anne, who'd supported his dream of making fine instruments all those years. 2 years later, Gene's health began to fail too. He died in January 2025.
Just want to thank you, Lord, for every time.
It's springtime in Westall, and the forsythia and redbuds are in full bloom. After a year of being mostly shuttered, Gene's shop is open again, this time for his memorial.
Always been there.
Close friends are gathered for one last round of music in the shop and to share memories of a man who changed their lives. They knew Gene as a master luthier and also as a generous teacher. 2 of Gene's apprentices, Casey Meikle and Austin Derryberry, remember how they found their way to Gene's shop.
I had heard of Gene before. I had never met him before, though. And so walking in here, it was just like walking into this magical land,
Really stepping in here was kind of the spark to understand that people did this kind of thing for a living.
Over the next year, Gene mentored Casey and Austin. He'd show them a step, send them home, and teach them the next step when they were ready. They still laugh about a particular piece of advice he gave.
I think he said the first 10 or 20 that you make, you should probably just throw in the fire.
Yeah.
Well, he said after that, you'll be getting somewhere.
Austin went on to win the National Grandmaster Old Time Fiddling Championship. And he built more fiddles with Gene through a state arts program. Austin recalls being amazed at how, after almost 70 years of making fiddles, Gene's love of the craft never waned.
His body was obviously here, but his mind was always somewhere else. He was always thinking of the next fiddle.
Gene spent the last months of his life in a nursing home. His longtime friend Keith Williams remembers how Gene stayed focused on fiddles.
He said, I'd like to get back out the shop and make one more fiddle, he said.
And Gene stayed as obsessed as ever with Stradivarius violins. Sometimes Gene and Keith joked about what they'd do if they could get their hands on a real Stradivarius.
And I said, boy, I'd like to play that thing once. What'd you like to do, Gene? He said, I'd like to take my pocket knife and take the top off of it and see what's in the middle of that thing. Oh.
But here's the thing. During his career, Gene really did get to hold a Stradivarius. Just once. And no, he didn't take a knife to it. When Gene turned 70, his friend Kenny Sears took him to meet the concertmaster of the Nashville Symphony Orchestra. She had a Stradivarius on loan.
When she pulled it out, Gene's eyes lit up. He was like a kid in a candy store, and he studied it for the longest time. I could just see he was recording every knife stroke.
Kenny had brought one of Gene's fiddles, too, and Gene got to hear his fiddle played next to a Stradivarius.
And when she played them back-to-back, they sounded the same. And when I played them back-to-back, they sounded the same. So he was making fiddles every bit as good as Stradivari.
Gene never forgot. Here he is after his 90th birthday in his busy, noisy shop, the last year it was open, still talking about that Stradivarius moment.
I think of it every day, how beautiful it was. The craftsmanship was just a perfection that a machine could never get. And yet, you could see little flaws around. One F-hole was set just a little higher. One side of the scroll was carved just a little lower, but it didn't take away from its beauty. And all 300 years of patina formed on it. And just think of the shiniest thing you can think of, and it would outdo it.
Now, at the memorial in his shop, Gene's friends honor him with music, playing tune after soaring tune. It's a fitting tribute to the man who became known as the Stradivari of the Cumberlands.
That was Lisa Kaufman, reporting for the Rural Remix podcast from the Center for Rural Strategies. With the expiration of enhanced federal subsidies, a lot of people are foregoing health insurance this year. But even with no insurance, there may be an affordable healthcare option near you. Reporters Kara Anthony and Blake Farmer with HealthQ have more.
Kara, I am going to tell you 4 letters that can mean the difference between getting medical care or not for many Americans. Are you ready?
Hit me.
F, Q, H, C.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. That's a federally qualified health center, but I usually just call them community health centers.
Well, most patients who go to these don't know they're going to an FQHC. It's not like those letters are in the name. But the most important thing to know about these clinics is they provide care to both insured and uninsured patients at affordable costs. We talked to Eduardo Mendoza, whose girlfriend goes to Connect Us Health in Nashville for monthly blood draws. She doesn't have insurance. Said it would cost $700 elsewhere.
With that financial assistance program that they have, it's covered up to $30. That's the most that she's had to pay.
And if it were much more, she'd just go without.
I didn't realize that they did lab work.
Yeah, they're pretty focused on primary care usually, but also they do pediatric care, prenatal. A lot of them have imaging, labs, even a pharmacy. Some clinics also do dental care and mental health services. They're trying to be a one-stop shop. The one thing they don't do usually is emergency care.
Okay, so Eduardo gave us the amount of $30 for blood draws. How did they decide that amount, and does everybody pay something different?
Well, the big question is if you have insurance, but if you don't, the office staff will usually ask for a pay stub to verify your income and then ask how many people are in your household, and then they'll use a sliding scale to determine what you owe.
So it's not free.
Well, usually not. But the point is they want to work with just about anybody to make it doable.
From my reporting and talking to people in my life, I don't think a lot of people know that these community health centers exist. Any idea why?
I spoke to Katina Beard of the Matthew Walker Comprehensive Health Center, another FQHC. For one, they don't have a marketing budget. But she also said there are people who are just skeptical of getting care at a low-cost clinic.
I think people believe that the services are substandard in some way. And I have to tell them that we are accredited just as your private physician offices. Our staff are board certified. And so there is no difference between the quality of care that you will receive at a federally qualified health center versus another entity.
Okay, so these clinics sound like a good option, but let's keep it 100, Blake. People aren't going to remember FQHC. So what's really the best way to find one?
All right, take it to the Google and Google Federal Health Center near me, and a locator should pop up. There are 1,400 in the U.S., so chances are one or maybe even a few of them will be near you.
You know, it can be really scary not to have health insurance, and a lot of people sit around and suffer, but it's good to know that these community health centers are a place where you can go and get what you need.
7 years ago, poet Michael Hevich landed in Black Mountain, North Carolina. Since moving there, Hevich has published 4 books of poetry, including his latest, A Sharper Silence. The book explores nature, touches on Hurricane Helene, and speaks of his relationship with his wife, Colleen, who died last year of lung cancer. Producer Bill Lynch spoke with Hevich about the collection.
Would you like to read something?
Certainly. I'd like to read a poem called Delicate Bones. She called to say there was a snake in our bedroom. Nothing to be scared of, just a little guy. She said I should come home and see it before it slipped into a closet or under the floorboards. It looked harmless, she said, and very beautiful. When she texted pictures, I couldn't help noticing the bulge halfway down the snake's body, a mouse, or even a chipmunk. And indeed, the snake was a beauty. Then she said it had slipped away already. I hope it's not hiding in a drawer or the dirty clothes hamper. I'd told her, I'm sure, my brother had a boa constrictor as a boy. My mother helped him feed it once a month with laboratory rats she got from the Cancer Research Center in town. It took a whole month for the lump in the snake to move from the front to the back, out. By then, just delicate bones, scrubbed clean. My brother watched that snake while he lay in his bed, recovering from cancer. He'd been stitched up along the back of his head, a bit like those test rats. The thread was black and the stitches looked sloppy, like a badly mended baseball. I remember how wide the snake opened its mouth as the dazed rat just seemed to walk in.
That's interesting. So why did you choose that poem?
Well, I chose it because I think when one is first becoming acquainted with a poet's work, it's often good to start with the more accessible of that poet's poems, and its images are readily available. You know, they're quite striking. I think I just feel like it's a good one to start with, and I think the ending image, at least to me, is a strong one, and it's not just a strong one for the poem itself, but I think it's a strong one for the book.
Talk about the book a little bit.
In 2023, my wife was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And so this book, which is called A Sharper Silence, was written during the 2 years she was surviving the stage 4 lung cancer. So all the poems in the book are about the experience of two people who love each other and have loved each other for a long time, facing the end of one of those two people's lives. And I wasn't going to publish it, but then a friend of mine said, why don't you try sending it to the press that did publish it, which is called Terrapin Books, and I did. That's where this book came from.
You've lived several places, very different locations, and you've experienced everything, New York, Vermont, Colorado, Florida. Does place play into your poetry, into your work?
Absolutely. And every aspect of my poems, I think, employ place in, the flora, fauna, light, and trees and flowers of those various places. In fact, I've thought in the past sometimes that one reason I never really used New York, for example, except in poems about family. Of course, I write about family too, but place doesn't really enter in my memory when I think of New York. And I think there was a certain familiarity to the place, having grown up there, that made the sort of striking images that wake one up and bring a poem to the fore, at least for me. It doesn't really happen there. And one of the things about Miami was it was always such a strikingly surprising place, that I couldn't help walking out, my yard and seeing something that elicited what ended up being a poem. I would say place is central to me. Sometimes people have called me a nature poet, which I don't think I am at all, but I think I would say I'm a poet of place, and a poet that has written about and drawn from many different places that I have inhabited.
What's your perspective like where you live now?
Beautiful. I love it here. I not only love the land and the landscape and the rivers and the vividness of everything that's growing around me all the time. I love the fact that we have bears coming across our property all the time. To my mind, they're wild, and so I love watching them and just being quiet around them. But I also love the culture here. I love the people more than any other place I've ever lived. The people are open in a way that is, I don't know how to say it, just beautiful, and I welcome it. We're in a very wounded landscape now from Hurricane Helene.
I was going to ask about Helene.
And one of the things that, happened during Hurricane Helene, my wife was not doing well then, and people helped us. People we didn't even know helped us. We had to leave our house for 5 weeks and go stay with friends. Actually, friends we didn't even know before the hurricane. We stayed in their house for 5 weeks. They were generous and gracious to us for the entire time. Something that just moves my heart so deeply. And people came to our property and cleaned it up for us and helped us in so many unprecedented and unpredictable ways. I'm so grateful.
The new book obviously deals with a very difficult time in your life. Where are you with your writing now?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. When my wife Colleen, died, what I really turned to was writing poems, because that's what I've done my whole life, really. I wrote a 50 or so page poem in sections, not just a continuous poem, but I wrote every day. For the first 3 weeks or so, I just got up in the morning and just worked on memories and feelings and all sorts of things that were coming to me then. And I just wrote these poems, and I ended up writing a whole book of poems. And I'm actually not going to do what I normally do, which would be go back over and revise until they're quote-unquote good poems or finished poems. I'm just going to keep the manuscript as it is, and perhaps publish it, perhaps not, but that is the main thing I did in terms of writing after she passed away. And I'm always working on writing. I get up every day and work on writing. It's not that it gives you solace, but it gives you, in a sense, something to do, someplace to go, a home, when everything has been sort of, I guess, ripped away. So I'm very grateful to the fact that I discovered poetry as a young guy, and have just been working on it for my entire life. It's almost as though that's the gift that it gave me. I have this time of, I'm not sure, solace, I guess, in the work. However good it is. I know, it might not be good, it might be terrible. It might not, that doesn't really matter to me now.
That was Michael Hevich speaking with Bill Lynch. A Sharper Silence is available through Terrapin Books. Temperature blankets are a popular project among crocheters. They began as a way for fiber artists to document the daily temperatures of the year, using red yarn for record highs and shades of blue for the cooler days. But the tradition of telling a story through textiles goes way back, to ancient times. Folkways reporter Wendy Welch has this story.
When Sierra Pike crochets, she feels peaceful, which is ironic because she crochets on the couch at night as her husband and sons race around the house shouting and playing.
I crochet to help me relax and everything during the evening because I'm a working mom, and I just love to be able to sit with them, enjoy their sounds, while I also regress into my own little world.
Sierra lives in rural Retreat, Virginia. She is creating, or more accurately commemorating, a world within her crocheting. Sierra is making a temperature blanket. Each row represents a day in the year she has chosen to capture in yarn.
How I understood the temperature blanket was tracking important moments in your life. Oh, that's how the weather was that day? I never would have thought about that, but that was really special. Like, it's just, you can kind of look back and they're all different colors. They're all the same colors in each row, but it all tells a story.
Some crafters stick to colored stripes rendered in single crochet, the simplest of stitches. Others choose more complicated patterns like granny squares or rippled rows. What the blanket records can be as casual or deeply layered as its creator chooses. For the blanket Sierra is working on now, she chose to dive deep. She uses a raised puff stitch that looks like a little pillow to commemorate
date nights, games that my boys have played, things that I know I'll be able to look back and just be like, oh, that was a really special day. The one that I really wish I would have put on there, we saw an otter in a local pond. So he's probably getting a charm.
Charms or buttons can mark special events. During the COVID years, people wove black ribbons along a row to commemorate a loss. Many still do this, plus use white, blue, or pink to note family additions. Textile storytelling is common to most cultures, but Sierra got inspired after watching a documentary about Aztecs and Incas weaving and knotting symbols into clothing and calendars. Veronica Rodriguez is a Spanish professor at the University of Virginia's College at Wise. Her studies include how ancient Mesoamerican cultures used symbols in clothing.
Textiles were used to record history, right? How the colors meant something, the design meant something.
Veronica joins Sierra in seeing temperature blankets as part of a long-standing cross-cultural tradition of people using textiles to tell stories.
And, I think it's great that people are using those fabrics to tell a story because it's handmade and it's art and they learn from their grandma and their mom and it's an ancestral sort of thing. And I think that's something that we don't appreciate. So using that art making to tell stories, I think is pretty important.
The oldest preserved example of a story on cloth is arguably Europe's Bayeux Tapestry, completed in 1077 to commemorate the Battle of Hastings. In Appalachia, telling stories using quilts appeared with the first settlers, while indigenous weaving and embroidery depicting community events were here long before they arrived. Chris Knight sees making temperature blankets as a combination of family documentation and affection. A retired pharmacist from Wise, Virginia, Chris made temperature blankets for her husband and brother, chronicling significant years in their lives.
It increases the thoughtfulness of the gift when you can say, I made this for you and I chose this year because it meant something in your life. So it's not just a blanket to put over you, but it has a little bit of meaning behind it. And I hope that you realize I was thinking of you with every row I put in the blanket.
Her husband's Afghan documents the year they met. She used his favorite sports team's colors, which necessitated hunting down 6 shades of purple and 3 of gold. But it isn't just the recipient Chris is thinking of as she crochets. It's also the person who taught her.
55 plus years ago, my grandmother taught me. I like keeping it alive. It keeps me close to her, even though she's gone.
And sometimes Chris couldn't tell you what she thinks about as she moves her hook through the yarn in a repetitive, fluid motion. Even when concentrating on a complex pattern, she finds herself lost not in the memories she's capturing, but in the zone.
In that zone where I'm thinking about something else, but my hands are working, and I'll get to the next row and think, what was I thinking about 5 minutes ago because I can't get my hook in this stitch?
Karen Long, an armed forces widow living in Hillsville, Virginia, also likes zoning out while crocheting. Karen learned from her husband's grandmother.
My husband's grandmother came to visit one weekend. I told her, I said, Grandma, I want to learn how to crochet. And I went and got some yarn and a crochet hook, and she sat down with me, and by the time she left, I had made a pair of slippers and a triangular type poncho thing for my daughter.
Karen followed that up over the next 30 years by making an Afghan for each of her 12 grandchildren. This includes a posthumous one for a granddaughter murdered by her partner. Karen donated that blanket to a domestic violence fundraiser. She's glad her granddaughter's blanket can serve a good cause. The 2 temperature blankets Karen is making right now are for herself. One records high temperatures for the year, the other lows. They give her space to think about whatever she wants, like the highs and lows of her own life, or not to think at all.
I enjoyed keeping up with it because it gives me a sense of, hey, I'm sticking with this. I can sit and do it and watch television at the same time, or just kind of space out while I'm doing it.
That sense of groundedness meets zoned outness is ubiquitous in making these Afghans. And they also knit the past and the future together, says Sierra Pike.
Memories are what makes the world go round. They keep us grounded. They make us strive for more. And if you can have a visual representation of that in front of you every day, it's something that's going to go for generations.
From pre-written history to the present day, people capture the great and small stories of their lives in fiber, following a perhaps primal urge to record memories in their own creative, coded way. For Inside Appalachia, I'm Wendy Welch.
Till next time, thanks for joining us as we journey throughout Appalachia. Our theme music is by Matt Jackford. Other music this week was provided by Mary Hott, Gene Horner, David Odell and Dave Bing, Paul Loomis, and Tim and Dave Bing. Bill Lynch is our producer. Abby Neff is our associate producer. Our executive producer is Eric Douglas. Kelly Libby is our editor. Our audio mixer is Patrick Stevens. We had help this week from Folkways editor Mallory No Pain. You can find us on Instagram @InAppalachia. You can also send us an email to insideappalachia@wvpublic.org. Visit wvpublic.org/InsideAppalachia to subscribe to our newsletter and stream all of our stories. Or look for Inside Appalachia on your favorite podcast app. Inside Appalachia is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.